When I was a young child in Sunday school, a very traditional Sunday school with a very traditional curriculum and very traditional beliefs and doctrine, I was pretty confused about a lot of stuff that was said. Now, I will have to say, however, I did learn a lot of Bible content which paid off really, really well, enormously well, when I was in seminary on Bible content exams in Old and New Testament introductory courses. And while lifelong Presbyterians were struggling, we Presbyterians who had grown up in more traditional traditions, more conservative traditions, were breezing right on through this Bible content part of seminary. And my early background paid off a whole lot too during my ordination exams. Anyway, as a young child learning about creation back in my traditional Sunday school class, I had a lot of questions that seldom were answered to my satisfaction. For instance, I could never figure out that part about not eating fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I wondered, why would that be a bad thing? Why would you die just because you wanted to know the difference between good and evil? Then several years passed and I went to seminary. Now let me tell you a secret about seminary. Everyone thinks you go to seminary to get answers, and there certainly are a lot of people there that are trying to do just that. But here's the thing. If you really take your studies seriously, opening your mind to new things, delving into the depths of all that awesome stuff they give you, you actually end up with more questions than you had when you started. Now, I don't think ministers are supposed to tell you that, but it's the truth. Still, though, even when I left seminary with tons of questions, I had learned an awful lot in those 3 years. I learned there was not a creation story in Genesis, not a creation story in Genesis. In fact, there were 2 creation stories just in the first 2 chapters. What's more, I learned they don't say the same thing. Each give very different perspectives on creation. And as far as people are concerned, the stories present somewhat contradictory ideas about what it means to be human. That's called anthropology, but don't worry about that. After a little while, with a little more life and professional experience, I started my PhD work still with many questions. Again, I probably had even more questions when I finished than when I began. One of my very first PhD classes was theological anthropology. I'm sure that sounds extraordinarily exciting to each and every one of you. Now, I had a new question to intrigue me. What is the human? What does Imago Dei really mean? What does it mean to be created in the image of God? What does this tell me about who I am? What impact does this have on me or on anyone else? What difference does any of this make in the world? Except that now, as I look back, I realize this wasn't really a new question for me at all. It was the same question I was asking back in my traditional Sunday school class as a young child. This morning, we're looking at 2 accounts of the beginning of humankind. And I wonder, what are your questions? The 2 stories before us are both sacred texts from our Holy Scriptures. In the first story, out of chaos, God creates. God creates step by step the whole created order, day by day creating light, sky above, earth, water below, gathering into specific places so dry land appears, all vegetation of all kinds, all the plants, all the trees. Then comes sun, moon, and stars, birds and all living creatures of the waters, every kind of living animal on the earth. On the 6th day, the story tells us God creates one more kind of animal, the human, a creature, female and male, made in the divine image of God, to be like God, to be a reflection of the holy, to care for all creation. And God looks around, sees the wonderful blessedness, the amazing goodness of all that is, and God is pleased, very pleased. So God gives humans every plant and every tree for their food. God gives the animals all the green plants for their food. God also gives the humans responsibility for all the earth, along with the mandate to care for every living creature. Then with all this work completed, God rests, content with the blessedness of creation, with everything necessary to keep this original blessedness in place. And that's the end of the story. more of a narrative, a bit like a mini-novel, the next story of creation mentions little about the heavens and the earth and the coming into being of most things. The focus is on human creatures, details of how the human comes into being, and who these human creatures really are. The earth and everything on it is mostly to provide the environment where humans live. The earth is like the stage where human life evolves over time, coming into being in phases, as human life is lived out in nuanced detail with complicated, important relationships, with critical decisions to be made. Most curiously, unlike the first story, where humans have every plant and tree for their food, in the second story, the first earth creature is told not to eat from, not even to touch, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or death will be the consequence. As you know, humans make a choice. They eat the fruit, gaining newfound knowledge, becoming more like God, knowing good, knowing evil, able to discern the distinction between choices and actions that are life-giving and choices and actions that harm and destroy. Again, my question, why would you die just because you made a choice to gain understanding of the difference between good and evil? Why did God not want humans to know this? Maybe they weren't ready yet. Perhaps in God's multi-step process of forming the human, as portrayed in this story, people needed a little more time to develop a little bit further before they would be ready to take on this much responsibility as moral agents in a world at this high level. At any rate, they make a choice, perhaps inadvertently taking on new responsibilities for themselves and their world. Perhaps very surprised this new knowledge brought with it new obligations. If they just could know what they're getting into, would they still do it? I don't know. Maybe the fruit just looks so good. Maybe the idea of greater knowledge and understanding is just too compelling. But whether or not they really want further obligations, all of a sudden, life changes. Their knowledge is greater. Life is more difficult. The responsibilities increase. Now they know the difference between good and evil. Now a big life task, a lifelong task, will be discerning between what is right and what is wrong. No longer able to live in blissful ignorance, but fully responsible in full awareness, they are called to stand on the side of good and over against all that is evil.